Ed Gillis, welcome to Dirtbag Rich.
Thanks so much for having me. It's very excited.
Tell me about some of the adventures you and your family have gone on together that other people think are either crazy or impossible.
And I think part of the thing with doing bike touring, and our big thing is bike touring with our kids, and I think people tend to think that it sounds impossible, it sounds crazy. But the first thing I really do need to tell people is that you don't have to be an athlete to do what it is that we've been doing. My wife Jocelyn is good at everything, but I've always been painfully average athletically. When I was a kid, we couldn't really afford hockey as a Canadian, which is everybody else affords. So I was a bowler when I was growing up. I'm terrible with my feet, so I played softball instead of soccer. Softball is like baseball, but with a larger ball so that all the uncoordinated kids can still hit it. I played volleyball and basketball, but only up till grade 7, and then I stopped being good enough for that. And then I ran a little bit of cross country in high school. We were a pretty elite school in cross country running, but my team was always the one who didn't make it to the next level, and we were always kind of left behind in all the trips.
You're
And
really painting a picture of non-athletic achievement
that,
here.
and that's, I guess, because one of the it has to be said, because when people say, "Oh, we've done all this stuff with your kids, you must be able to scale all these mountains on your bicycle," like that is it is truly not the case. I kind of with all times with your when you're going with kids, um, you kind of grow into it a little bit too, right? So when we started out, my wife and I mean, we had biked together a lot since we had first met. We kind of fell in love on bicycles. And we did our honeymoon from Vancouver to Tijuana, and then a bunch of different other bike trips. So we were just happiest when we were on bikes. But when it came time for kids, a lot of people told us, "Oh, okay, then that's the end of that. You guys don't get to do your adventures anymore." But clearly remember a friend of mine named Brad who said, kids are actually pretty portable. Like when they're babies, you just carry them everywhere, and you don't need to bring food because probably breastfeeding, and so maybe you can just go and do something else. And it was kind of that sparked this idea for us. So our very first trip with our son Heron, he was 6 months old or 6 weeks old. I'm sorry. We went to an old family cottage, kind of little old cabin in the woods. And then from there, we started plotting. And when he was about 2 months old, we went on hiked on the Camino de Santiago. And That was pretty amazing. That he was the French people called him the plus petit pèlerin, which is the youngest, the littlest pilgrim on
Ah,
this long pilgrimage. And so we hiked that year along the Camino, and then southern Spain and into Italy. And then we went into South America and hiked along in Patagonia with him. We hiked about 2,000 kilometers with him on Jocelyn's back. And then I had a backpack of about 50 pounds on me, which, given my previously stated poor athleticism, was a bit of a struggle, but we did it. But I think like it just, as you grow, as the kids grow, you just meet the challenges with them. So that was our first hike and our first adventure, and got us realizing, wow, this is something that, um, not only are we not going to have to miss out on all of our adventures that we love doing together, but we get to do more because we've got kids. And so since then, every summer, since the kids were babies, our second son Sitka was born 2 years later. We hiked through Hawaii for a while with him, and then we just every summer we would take 2 or 3 weeks when we could from our jobs and our schooling, to bike all around BC. There's a great biking on the Sunshine Coast, the Kettle Valley Rail Trail, and the Okanagan. We went along through the Rockies post-COVID. We've also biked through Cuba, but then our biggest trips we kind of reserved for, we kind of saved up and found moments in our lives where we could take 6 months. And when the boys were 7 and 5 years old, we cycled across Oceania, about 6,000 kilometers total. So we went from north to south in New Zealand, and then just a few years ago, they were, I guess, 13 and 11, and we went through Europe. So we cycled 10,000 kilometers in Europe through 20 countries over 6 months, all on our own bikes this time. And yeah, so that's and now we've kind of got to the point, we can get touch on it later, but now we got to the point where they are pretty settled in their high school, and we still find little way opportunities to get by. But at this point, as we're kind of coming towards the end of our parenting journey with them, at least them at home, we're feeling pretty confident that we did a pretty decent job at showing them how to adventure.
You and I almost crossed paths summer 2022 when we were both cycling on the Camino. I believe my friend and I were going east, and your family was going west, but we somehow missed each other. And I had heard about you online. I think someone pointed me your direction. Um, so a real missed opportunity, Ed. But
Yeah.
I've run into a few other families in my own cycle travels. One that really stands out was on the Carretera Austral in Patagonia. A French family
Mhm.
was cycling with four kids,
Wow.
and three of them had their own bikes. One was on one of the parents' bikes. And what really stands out to me is we encountered them in one of the most remote stretches, some of the worst gravel, just like really far away from assistance. And they all seemed to be so chill and relaxed. And right
Yeah.
before they departed this rest stop to continue cycling in the opposite direction, both of the parents took out like e-cigarettes and took these long drags on their
No
e-cigarettes.
way.
And I was like, come on, this is a bit too stereotypical.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
so,
That's hilarious.
but I don't see that many families who are out there doing it. And I think that people who are listening and thinking, okay, it kind of makes sense when you have this like 3-month-year-old who you can just strap onto your back. But what happens when they become mobile, when they can start running
Mhm.
away from you and getting themselves into trouble and disappearing? And so maybe go back and describe how these adventures progressed and how you managed as a family when you were in that stage of raising young kids.
Yeah, I think you do have to adapt. I mean, and so, I think a lot of the adventurous life is kind of some of it is doing what you want to do when you want to do it, but there's a lot of you kind of have to structure things and adapt a little bit with kids. But you find that that's actually that leads to so many other better things. We started out with them on a chariot, so like one of those things that you tug behind them, and then those. Yeah, I guess after the hiking part. So the first adaptation overall was that when a baby is newborn, you can't wear a helmet because their skull is still forming. So we're like, oh, geez, I guess we've got to hike. Okay, and we loved hiking. It was phenomenal. We never would have thought that we would have enjoyed just walking together, the two of us, with Heron sleeping most of the time in the backpack. But we never would have thought we enjoyed that much. And so that was a pretty phenomenal experience to just have that awakening moment. But then once they could bike, we got them onto bikes. And so into the chariot they went. When there were the two of them, it would be pretty heavy, but they would be in the back. And then we bought then another kind of this contraption that fits on the back of our old mountain bike called an extra cycle. And so the extra cycle, we ended up like rigging it with a couple extra handles, and then Joss like fabricated this little padding out of some foam and some like an old rain jacket. And so we just made it so that it was super comfortable for them. So we were riding a lot, and I was actually even when we were in town and Joss was in med school, we would I would be biking around town with what we called the three-seater because it had three seats in it, and we would be biking around doing groceries. So that was the second set, was the three-seater, and it was they were still mobile and they were able to kind of be out there in the air, but they didn't need to pedal or anything yet as they were really young. And then actually we jerry rigged this like old like bike seat, like this padded bike seat, so that the youngest one could nap and they would switch. Then the next contraption that was cool was called the Weehoo. And the Weehoo It was kind of like a reclining bike attached to the back of our bike. And the best thing about that was that they could pedal, and it was in no way helpful at all for us to have them pedal in terms of moving forward. But they were also strapped in. So like they could pedal and pedal, and they felt really engaged, and they were getting their exercise. And then they would just nap when they needed to nap as well. So that was a pretty good setup. And then so there's early days as they were getting more wandery, and they wanted to wander more. We just stopped more. And again, as I say, like not super athletic. So we kind of welcomed that we could go 40 or 50 kilometers in a day, and we'd have to stop. And the stopping was probably the best part because we had to look ahead and where we were going, and like, here's a neat park, or here's a neat beach, or here's a neat spot that we can stop. And so we had to kind of really see much more of what we saw around us. Before that, Joss and I would often have a plan of, going 80 kilometers a day or 90 kilometers a day. And we would kind of miss some things a little bit too, because we needed to get somewhere, but the kids just make you stop and look around a lot more. As they got older, we got these phenomenal contraptions called Bike Friday family tandems, and these are like tailor-made in Oregon. This is one of our biggest splurges because at the time we were living with like student loans and lines of credit and all this stuff. So we splurged on these bike tandems because we knew we were going to Australia and New Zealand. So the Bike Fridays are these marvelous things that can be taken apart in about an hour and a half, and they can fit inside a Samsonite suitcase. If you can picture just like the ones that the old folks roll onto the plane, you put your bike in the suitcase and then you just roll it onto the plane. There's no questions. There's nobody asking you what's in it. You just roll it on and then you get it to your destination, and then you put your bike back together in an hour and a half. And the kids, they're 7 and 5 at this time. They loved it. They started to get into the mechanics of it, and they would help us put them back together. And then we could ride wherever we wanted to. And you actually attach the Samsonite suitcases at the back of the bike, and you tug those along as well. So that kind of got into that point. And those tandems were great because you could feel them helping you. So we were going up, I remember very vividly in New Zealand on the South Island, there's a pass called Host Pass.
Oh, yes.
And it's just a little bit north of Wanaka. So you're coming into Wanaka. You just left the West Coast. You're coming into Wanaka on the South Island. And we just like loaded them up with some with protein bars and all that stuff, and it was a long slog, but I could feel I had the youngest behind me, Sitka, and he's just singing along, and he's just like "Host Pass" because he thought that word was so funny, and we were just laughing, and it just kind of flew by because it was really terrible on our legs, but like, man, the kids loved it. And when Sika said, like, I'm going to go into turbo mode now, Dad, I'm like, all right, let's go into turbo mode. And then boom, I get this little boost with these little legs for, I don't know, 30 or 45 seconds at a time until he got exhausted. But man, it was always at just the perfect time. So, I mean, yeah, you're right that like, there are periods where it becomes more awkward, like especially with hiking. If we were hiking, we're like, oh man, they're a little too young to do too far or whatever. But you also find a lot of neat ways to get kids, to motivate them. So a lot of the motivating for us were like math games or spelling games. So they'd be bored on a hike, or they'd be like, I don't want to hike anymore. We're like, okay, we're doing a math game. And for some reason we were lucky. Maybe they just loved it. So they were just, all right, let's do 8 by 8 times 8, 4 times 4, 3 times 6, and the time would fly by. And now, I mean, they're probably in grade 2 and grade 3. Like now they know their multiplication tables better than all their friends do. So the teachers appreciate that. And then on the bikes, just to say quickly about bikes, on the biking, we found that sometimes even as they got older, we need to distract them even on the bicycles. And so music ended up being the way to do it. And, so we bought this is years ago, we bought this this is before, now each of us have our own Spotify list that we have to take turns playing on our bikes. But this is like an old kind of bike radio, and you had to like download the songs onto it. And so we did this, and we were biking on the Cascade Mountains in Washington. We were there for 2 weeks. We were going up these Cascade Mountains, another really long slog. And somehow we messed up. like the downloading. So the problem was that there was only one album of all of the ones we picked. We're like, I downloaded my, 90s grunge, and Joss downloaded her country, and the boys downloaded theirs, and the only one that stuck was the best hits of One Direction. And oh my
Wow,
God,
lucky you.
that was 2 weeks of One Direction, and to this day we still love One Direction. It is like those songs come on, and the moments just come flooding back. But in the moment, we were really pretty tired of those same songs, and all the time. And but the kids loved it because they was the songs that they picked. So yes, all those ways are ways to get. And over the years, we've just found a ton of different. Like we get to it more. We talk about it lots more in our books and stuff. But like tons and tons of ways to motivate kids that we've learned on the way too. And now they ride their own bikes and they carry their own gear, and they carry, actually, to be honest, like most of the gear for us too. So I always used to joke that like eventually I'm going to be the one in the chariot in the back with them boys pulling me, and I think we're getting close to that.
Oh, that's a beautiful vision, Ed. What a total role reversal. And
Napping in the back of the chariot. I can't
yeah,
wait.
yeah, you've trained your own porters.
That's right.
So people must see you and say, "How long is your trip?" And you're like, "Well, we're out here for 2 months. We're out here for 6 months." They say, "Have you done this before?" You're like, "We do something kind of like this every summer," and they just assume, "Great, these guys must just come from wealth. No one else could possibly afford to take this much time off to just go cycle or hike around with their kids." And
Yeah.
so please tell me about the illustrious lineage that you come from, and the trust funds that you withdraw from every month.
Yeah. I guess a bit about my backstory. I grew up in a pretty traditional family, working class city in southern Ontario, near Niagara Falls, called St. Catharines, and it's auto workers. Although my dad was an architect, and just kind of getting by from thing to thing. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad had his 9 to 5 job. As I said, like. In Canada, the measure of your social status is whether you can afford to play hockey, and we were not one of those families. So the bowling aside, it was still a wonderful childhood. It was stable. But we had no clue of the world outside of us. We would go on, like 1 week cheap little camping trips in our like really, really inefficient canvas tent to go camping back in the days when camping in Ontario didn't cost like 50 or $60 a night. So we would do a lot of that. But I think what I appreciated most about my childhood anyway is that I got my best parenting lesson out of that. And that was that my parents structured their life to be present. So my mom was stay at home because she always wanted to do that. And when she did go back to work, it was just during the school day, when we were well into high school. My dad was always a coach and a scout leader. Like, we're not really big talkers, my family, but he was always there. And so present in his own way. And so I think that, like, we didn't have any money. We weren't, vividly remember my mom bought me like a new baseball glove, and I was so thankful for it. And she's like, I can remember her saying to me in the car, like, we're just happy that you're so thankful for. So it's for the little things. But family was everything. Being that time together was really, really important. And I think when you have awesome parents, you want to grow up and you want to be an awesome parent. So that's kind of where we came from. And I guess I got to learn how to get by with not a lot of stuff too, and just appreciate some of those little things that then we pass on to our kids. So then fast forward, I guess I meet Jocelyn, who also grew up in a family without a lot of money. Her parents had split when she was young, but they were also both really dedicated to spending time individually with their kids. So that kind of ethic was passed to her as well. But when I first met Jocelyn, she was starting a cross-country bicycle organization it was called the Atesha Project, which is since folded a few years ago. But for many years, they were a bunch of young kind of activists, sort of like young people, kids in their 20s, who were all about sustainable consumption. So the idea of like consuming less and more ethically, like fair trade back before fair trade was a big thing, and riding on your bikes and secondhand clothing, like that was the thing. And so I met her and I just like fell in love with her, with the idea, the whole bit. And so we spent a couple of years in a tiny apartment with the entire rest of the people who worked in the organization. So we were like crammed into this little apartment, and we would go for like the highlight of our week was if we found bananas on the expired rack at the grocery store, because that meant muffins, right? We were so excited. And every once in a while, one of our roommates, Lori, would say, guys, I think, can we get a stick of butter this week? That would be the best, like I could make better muffins if I had just a stick of butter, right? And so we would do that. So that was kind of where we come from, is getting by. Once we were married, it was the same kind of ethic. Secondhand clothes, no television. We never had a car until we moved to the Yukon here a couple of years ago. Even then, it's like a $5,000 crap box that I've run into a number of different trees. I slid off the road a couple of years ago and ran into a tree, and it just kept going. We didn't have cell phones until just recently. We used to have my granddad's old duck phone that quacks when it answers. So I kind
Oh
of
my
wanted to
gosh.
stay with that as long as I could.
Yeah, keep the duck
Um,
phone.
yeah. And so I think and I guess the lifestyle we've chosen though, like doesn't really need a lot of money. Like biking and outdoor life is cheap. Like even when Joss was in med school and we were racking up all our line of credit, debt was we prioritized our weekends outside. So we would work super hard. At the time I was working. So, but we structured our lives around being with the kids. So like I was a stay-at-home dad, but I also worked. So I would get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I was a ghostwriter for an organization that my friends had run. And so I worked from 4:30, 5 o'clock till about 7:30 when Joss had to go to school. And then I was with the boys all day, and we would play outside and we'd go to the park and we'd do the free gymnastics thing and we'd do all these things, play board games. And then when Joss got home at 5, I'd have dinner ready, and then I worked till 10. And then when the boys went to bed at 7, she studied till 10. So we just structured our lives to get by financially best we could, and to spend the time with them. I guess when we do splurge, and we splurge on groceries. We splurge on, to be honest, like organic produce, which I know for some people feels a little out of reach as well, but that's the only thing we splurge on, and our bikes.
Mm.
So I'm currently sitting in a garage with a lot of bikes because things are a little bit different than they used to be. But um, I can totally remember the first bike I bought when I had for Joss, because the bike I had before Joss was stolen from the side of my house in grade 11, and I didn't bike until I met her. And then I bought this bike because I was so in love with this woman that I met, and I was like, I'm buying the best bike I can afford, and it was like $200. And then it was like years later that every time I went into a mechanic, the mechanic said, this is a really kind of crappy bike, right? Like this is like an entry level bike. Like all of the parts are crappy. And I said, oh, I know that, but I know. So like bit by bit, I built this bike, which I called Sol for solidarity because I was a hippie at the time. We we bought like every little. I would like spend a little bit extra on each little part till basically I'd built up a bike that worked pretty well. And I got by on that until just recently when I got a new touring bike, and because Saul had just run his time, I felt bad for him. And yeah, this new touring bike is just fantastic. So wow, a bike can run really smoothly. Like the brakes don't have to rub. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, all that to say that we found ways to do things, and even still today that now Joss has graduated from med school and I'm teaching, and I think the ethic we want to pass to the boys is that like you don't need to spend money on things that aren't important. And for us, it was always about priorities. And I think even what you've talked about in the past on the podcast, which I love, is the idea of priorities and finding time to passion and time, but also like finding the financial means to do it. And for us, our priority with kids, especially, and most parents will understand this, is like it's time. Priority is time with your kids. So whatever it takes, you make that happen. And so there's a lot of sacrificing and a lot of really long nights and a lot of exhaustion while we were both in school, and I was kind of working. Then I went back to teachers college. So Um, yeah, we just there were some really lean years, but we also decided as well. And one big cost of parenting is daycare, and not at all that this has to be everybody's decision, but we just decided we didn't want to do daycare, and so that's what came of it. Is like, hey, you save a lot of money because you're with them all the time, and you just work all around their waking hours, and we were able to find a way to do it. So we just had to work pretty hard. We racked up a large line of credit and while we're going to school now, so we're slowly paying it off. It's kind of like we're paying for it now, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And let's dive into the specifics of how you manage your time, and then we'll talk about money. So you mentioned that Jocelyn became a doctor. She's a naturopath, and she had to go
Yeah,
back to school for that and took on debt. And you were doing some of the ghostwriting stuff, but now you're a teacher.
yeah.
How are you able to balance this so that you are still able to spend time with the boys? Like, how do the puzzle pieces actually fit together, practically speaking?
Yeah. So for all that time, I guess, it took us a while to figure out what it is we wanted to do with our lives. Like when we first met, we just figured we were just gonna be young and in love and stuff forever, which we are now old and in love. And but I think so um after we've just finished school, I guess what we decided, like, hey, like what's gonna work so that we can spend time with the kids. And I mean, I'd always dreamed of being a teacher when I was in my 20s, but then I went off and did international development stuff and worked in federal politics for a long time. And but teaching just kind of kept coming back as like, hey, you want to structure your life around your kids, like this is the career for you, like. And so I chose it, and I do enjoy teaching. It is a passion of mine, but like I always kind of wanted to be prime minister, and I kind of always wanted to be I wanted to be in a comedy troupe like Monty Python, or in Canada, Kids in the Hall is like this famous comedy troupe. I kind of wanted to do that, but I'm a teacher because I want to be with my kids and I want to make things work. And so yeah, the teaching is now how I structure my time to be around them. They're actually at the same school as I am, so I bike into school with them. They bike home on their own because they've got skiing practice and stuff. But and then Jocelyn structures her clinic where she works 3 days a week. She's in clinic 3 days a week. She runs her own clinic, which isn't always the case. But and then also where we chose to live in the Yukon is a place where she was able to own her own clinic. She works on Mondays and Fridays to prepare for her 3 days a week that she's in clinic so that she can see the most amount of patients as possible and give them the full attention that they need. And so she's this beloved naturopathic doctor in town, who works her 3 days a week. And then on the weekends, she's completely free. And then she can close down the clinic. And the neat thing about the Yukon is like in the summertime, everybody wants to just get out. So nobody wants a doctor. Like she wouldn't have patients if she wanted patients in the summer.
Hmm.
And then I've got every holiday that the boys have, I have too. So it works out just great. So this summer, we well, actually, that's first of all how that worked out with Europe. And so in the Yukon also, it's a little bit of a chiller place, a lot chiller than in Europe, especially where you can just say, hey, I want to take like a leave. Um, for me, it was an unpaid leave, and we want to go for 6 months in Europe. And they around here, like they just shrug their shoulders and say, okay. And then the kids or the teachers are like, all right, well, your kid's doing okay. How about you like talk about this on your bike ride? Talk about like space and talk about like verbs. And like, all right, let's do that. And being a teacher, that helps a lot too because
Yeah.
I can do that. And so that's how our 6 month Europe trip happened, was organizing it that way. But then also every summer and they are now 16 and 14, and Blake, they still want to spend their summers with us. Like we gave them the
Mm.
choice last summer, like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Do you want to stay home? Do you want to have jobs? And they're like, nope, we want to go back to Denmark and we want to go around the Baltic Sea on our bikes. We're like, with us? And they're like, yeah, let's go. And we're like, all right, that's good. And I can tell you a bit more of the secrets later, but the short story of that one is that they both broke their arms within about a week away from our trip. And so like Heron he came home one day, well, he called me one day, like, I think I broke my wrist. And we're like, oh man, okay. So how are we going to bike? And then so we like within 2 weeks, we'd replanned to make it a hiking trip around France. And we had a great summer anyways. And then like about a week after Heron broke his arms, it goes like, yeah, I think my arm hurts a bit. And it was a buckle fracture, the same bone, same side. Both kids broke that bone, and so we hiked around Europe instead.
I have to
So
ask if they broke
yeah.
it the same way. Were they doing the same thing?
No, well, Sika's a little bit more maybe upfront than Heron. He just tripped in the forest running around with his friends, which one does in the Yukon, and it just happened to fall funny, I guess. And then Heron says that he was just goofing around with soccer, but I've heard accounts that he was trying to do a bicycle kick. So I don't know. But no, different things. But yeah, goofing around with friends basically
Yeah,
was
yeah,
just it.
normal
And it's
stuff.
one of those things. It's always like the things that the kids do on their skis, their downhill skis, like the tricks that they pull off. I one time saw Sitka go off a jump and like his one ski fell off and he was in the middle of midair and I don't know how he survived without it. But then like yeah, he's walking in the forest with his friends looking for wood or something and he fell and broke his wrist. So that's how things roll here.
So, you said you had some secrets that you were going to share with us later. Can you just share those secrets now? Which secrets were you referring to?
Oh, yes. The secret to, and this is, I guess, probably one of the bigger ones that I like to share with parents, especially parents of kids in their like 12, 13. They're like, dude, like my kid isn't going to want to do this. Like they're busy. They've got all these things, like they don't want to spend time with us or they're hooked on their video games or whatever. And I said to my friend John this summer, who was trying to get his kids into it, I said, what we learn is, especially in Europe, is like, let the kids plan the trip. Like they're old enough, they can figure it out, especially if they've been around a little bit. And we thought about it because at the one point, like with Europe, we just didn't have time. Like Joss and I didn't have time to plan every single day in every single country. And so we're like, okay, Sitka, you are on which countries do you want? He's like, I'm interested in Portugal and Denmark. And then, okay, Heron, what do you want? And I'm like, I want France and Norway or something, right? And so we had a family Google Doc and they just went to work. Like any spare moment, they were planning the trip. For Heron, it's surfing. So he's just really into surfing right now. And so his like entire time up the French coast, we were basically like rushing on our bikes to get from surf spot to surf spot. And so he was entirely engaged in that. For Sika, it's hiking. And so he really had read about the Dolomites in northern Italy. And so he wanted to go on a Via Ferrata. I don't know if you've probably done one of these things. It's so cool. It's like half mountain scaling and half just regular hike. So you're in a harness, but there's also these like iron rods built into the rock. And it's from World War One, where like between Austria and Italy, they were warring. And so they built these ways for their soldiers to scale into the Alps better. And so now they're just like these recreational trails or something. So we
Yeah.
got a guide, and that was what Sika absolutely wanted to do. When they were younger, it was a bit different. When we were in New Zealand, we said, so Sika's birthday was coming up, and we're like, Sika, like, what do you want for your birthday, buddy? And this is another thing about bike tripping that is cool is that like kids can just love the simplest things, right? Like just ice cream or I want French fries. But for him, he was like, I want to ride a horse and I want to pet a sheep. Because in New Zealand, that's all you see, right? Is sheep. Like we counted tens of thousands of sheep on our bikes. And so we like, how the heck do we find a pet a sheep? But we eventually found a way and he pet a sheep on his birthday. But as they get older, especially teenagers, like they can plan all of it. Like they plan the budgeting. And if they're invested in what we're doing, then they don't mind camping outside almost all the time because they're like, okay, well, if we get groceries instead of having a restaurant, like maybe I can go to that next ropes course or something. And so there's so many things that we found that Joss and I would never have thought to do. Like we never would have said to ourselves, oh, that looks really good. That's a big cable that you hold on to and then you get onto water skis and it tears you around this like ridiculous lake at this crazy pace called a cable park. And they're all across Denmark. And we found one, the boys found one. And we went and like we all loved it. and then like a ropes course like we found, and like, oh, let's climb around up here. Joss is afraid of heights, but she went anyway. Like we just love these zip lines, all these things that like as a couple we never would have thought to do. But man, the boys figuring it out and the boys planning the trip gets them invested and then
Mm,
gets us doing things that we
hmm
never would have done. I certainly don't like surfing. Like I'm terrible. I've got this like, I don't know if you know, there's that, if you're like the middle toe is a bit bigger than your big toe, they call it the intelligence toe. It means it's a sign of intelligence, which everybody who has one says it's a sign of intelligence, and nobody who doesn't have one says it is. But
of course.
anyway, I always break that surfing, like every time, without a doubt, and so because I stubbed my toe because I'm really awkward. But anyway, we go anyway, and the boys love it. And yeah, that's our thing, is get the kids to plan,
Yeah.
because if they plan it, then they're in. And so this is the thing. So even this last summer, even though it was hiking, and Heron's less into hiking, Sika was psyched about the hiking. But Heron said, okay, well, if we're going to hike, then if we're going to be in France, I want to see the Tour de France. We're like, well, are we going to do that? And he's like, don't worry, I'm going to figure it out. So he planned our whole hiking summer around how we could get to various different stages. And in the end, we saw 4 stages of the Tour de France, including the last one in Nice. And because that's what he wanted to do. And so we planned our summer around what he wanted to do. And then spontaneously, we ended up at the Olympics, and we went and saw there's a whole bunch of free things you can see at the Olympics. Like we saw the bike racing and the triathlon and a whole bunch of other stuff. So yeah, yeah, let the kids plan. That is like the
I,
number one. If you want to get your kids to do stuff with you, say, what do you want to do? I'm going to come along with you. And like whether you break your toe or you're scared of heights, like just do it, because like
yeah.
now's the time.
I love this. Earlier, you gave advice on like specific things to attach to the bike for younger kids,
Hmm.
and now
Yeah,
you're giving advice which is more relevant to adolescents and teenagers. And you and I are totally aligned in this because when I run my teen trips, I am constantly offloading all sorts of details and planning and purchases to the teens, and they just love doing this stuff in groups. And constraints breed
yeah,
creativity, and
yeah.
yeah, it's like if I tried to invest all the energy, or when my co-leaders tried to plan everything, everyone would come out more poor in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yes. Um,
Um, yeah. The one other thing with planning that I should probably mention that the boys loved, and this is maybe about how getting your kids out into the world helps teach them a lot, is that we were like at the very beginning, they're like, "Oh man, we're hungry. Like, what can we get?" And we say like, "We'll go into a bakery." And we're like, well, we're not going into the bakery. Like, you're the one that say you're hungry. Like, you go in. And they're like, okay, well, give us a little bit of money. We're like, well, we don't have a lot. Like, we'll get whatever you can get for €2 each, €2 each, and you have to order it in whatever language we're in. We were in Spain, so we knew a little bit of Spanish, so it was fine. And they're like, all right. So they came out and they loved it. And then we're like, oh, we should do this every day. And so throughout Europe, we called it the Desserts of Europe Challenge. And they got €2 every day to go and like load up on whatever they got. But they had to order in the language of the country, which was easy in Spain and French. We're Canadian, so we speak French, but Portuguese was hard. And then as you start going through Slovenia, Croatia, and Greece, where you can't even, like, it was impossible. But the boys now know, like, please, thank you. Can I have one of those? And delicious, like in every language in Europe. So the desserts of Europe were turned out pretty good. In France, we were a bit famished because like €2 buys you very next to nothing, and it's like really fancy. But like in Germany or in Denmark, it buys you like this gargantuan stang doughy thing that like keeps you going for hours.
uh, that's a very practical knowledge. Um,
That's right. There you
Uh,
go.
let's come back to the money question, Ed,
Yeah.
because the two places where you did your big trips and where you've done some shorter trips too are not exactly cheap places. Like
No,
Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe. I understand you did some Eastern Europe, but it sounds like you spent a lot of time in
mhm,
the more expensive parts of Europe.
we did.
And from the outside, I'm not seeing exactly where this money comes from. Like you're a school teacher, Jocelyn
Yeah.
is a naturopath who's not working exactly full time. You're living in the Yukon, where I imagine costs are a bit lower, but probably income is a bit lower also. And just tell me, is it really just frugality? Is it you guys, you
Yeah.
know, cooking black beans instead of going out to restaurants? Do
Yeah.
you have any other like sources of income or help from outside, help from the outside that is making this kind of life possible?
Um, we, well, the Yukon actually, and I probably would get in trouble for saying it, but the Yukon, the costs are a little higher than places, but the income is also considerably higher. So
Oh, I had it backwards.
Canada takes care a little bit of it because we're in the north and we're remote. There's a little bit more support and understanding that the cost of living is pretty high. Honestly, teachers, and maybe this is good because we're short on teachers here in the Yukon. Teachers get paid by far the best of any teacher in Canada. So when I graduated from my teachers college in British Columbia, I had like a small contract before I moved up to the Yukon, and I now make twice, like literally double the amount that a BC teacher makes in the Yukon. So we're lucky on that end, and then also Yukon, like Whitehorse being a capital city, that folks have um, decent government jobs and decent benefits. And so those Joss does pretty well as a naturopathic doctor, even though she's only working a little bit. So to be honest, like at this point, like we are like our income is now making up for the fact that we were I don't even know. I don't even remember, but like a couple of $100,000 in debt, probably with between lines of credit and everything else. For the first time in our lives, we bought a house, and we did have some help from family. So family lent us a little bit of money for the down payment, but we've since been able to pay that off to them as well. And as I say, we're still paying off like mortgages and mortgage and uh, we've paid off our family at this point, but yeah, paying off mortgage and still paying off a little bit of line of credit with our. So we're kind of like back. We did, and we both because we both came from families with no money. Like we had, but we also didn't have student loans for our university. Like we had to get scholarships. I took longer to finish my undergrad so that I could work and be able to pay it off. And Joss did the same thing. Like it's just like we've just done things, I think, slower. But then when we decided like this is what we want to do, we chose careers and I guess places to live where we would know. Well, we didn't know. We hoped with all our might that we would be able to pay off this debt, but we did rack up a lot of debt. So that's where Australia and New Zealand came from, was the debt, and then Europe came from. Still having like going into a little bit more debt, but like we're knowing that we'd be fine paying it off. If you talk to me in about 8 or 9 years when I want to retire and I can't yet because we still have all this debt, then I might be like, darn, was I thinking? But we're paying for it now, I think
Yeah,
is
yeah.
kind of the thing.
Is there anything you feel like you've
Yeah,
had to
but
really sacrifice or give up or say no to in order to have the amount of time that you have to go on the trips that
yeah,
you've gone on? Maybe stuff that your friends have, and you're like, oh, that would be nice, but we
well,
prioritize our time and adventure instead.
that's yeah. I think for me it was career. I probably could have done different career that would have been also interesting to me. Like I've done a whole bunch of different things in my life, but like at a certain point we I had to shift to where what it would be to in order to be able to make our lifestyle with our kids work. Um, we've never been interested in having like a television or cell phones or those kinds of things. Like I think especially when we first met, that mentality of really low consumption, that ethic of low consumption, just from like an environmental standpoint and a social standpoint, was kind of more our thing. So I don't really think that we think so much about sacrificing too much stuff. But I should say that like frugality is a good chunk of it, and kids kind of help a little bit, to be honest. Like the biking community, and I don't know if hopefully maybe somebody's mentioned it on your show before. There's a great bike community. It's similar to what the couch surfing is. It's called Warmshowers. And Warmshowers is this phenomenal bike community that is basically other cycle tourists who host other ones. So like when we were in Vancouver, especially, we hosted a lot of people coming through Vancouver. And the coolest thing about it is like you're also a cycle tourist. So you know what cycle tourists want. So they arrive and you're like, I'm going to give you a hot shower and I'm not going to talk to you and I'm going to, here's my laundry. And it's like,
And here are some
whoa, like
snacks.
you
Yes.
know me, and here's a huge meal. And and then when we go, that was what we would get. So, but also what's cool as well is that these are people that know the local scene. So I remember our good friend, still a good friend, Rod in Australia. He was like, well, I would try an Australian accent, but I would massacre it. So he just said, hey, I'm going to take you surfing. So like 7-year-old Heron, his surfing passion came from Rod, in just north of Sydney in Australia. And then we were in Spain. We stayed with a fellow named David, and he helped us navigate this Spanish bureaucracy. It's a super long story that it's not worth getting into now. How we ended up getting the visas to get through Europe all that time. But he was like, no, like Spanish bureaucracy is like a sport. Like you have to sweat a lot and you have to train and you have to know the rules and it still you can beat you down. But anyway, so he like navigated it with us because we had this new ally kind of thing. So Warmshowers is huge, but also I have to say, if you're going to bike anywhere with kids, you have to start in Australia and New Zealand because um, they just attract generosity. So like I would say maybe a slight exaggeration to say once a day, but at least once every 2 days, somebody would pull us over in a grocery store or on the middle of the road or once in a library and say like, hey, you're staying with us tonight. Like that's so cool. Your kids it's so neat. Stay with us and tell us all about your trip. And like, if it was 9 in the morning, we'd be like, well, we kind of got to get going. But like most of the time it was like 3, 4 in the afternoon. I remember one time we came out of this like rail trail and we were like really haggardly looking in a place called Angarui. And we saw this dude on an ATV and we're like, okay, is there a campground nearby? We think there's one. And he's like, no, man, come with me. You're staying with me. And he was on this venison farm. And although we're vegetarian, I was the designated like be polite and eat the venison. So I was sick for a few days afterward. But and then so it was just lovely. So we would go and stay in these people's house, and we would and like have this wonderful dinner and share all these wonderful stuff with them. And then Joss and I woke up in the morning at this one place, and the kids were eating ice cream for breakfast, and it was like basically staying with grandparents, right?
Mm.
Um, Everywhere along the way, especially with you've got kids, people want to talk to you. They want to ask you questions, and then they want to invite you over. And I remember another time it was amazing. It was like pouring rain. We're on the Whanganui River in New Zealand, over along that river there, and it was pouring rain. And so we arrived finally at our destination, and there's a pickup truck there. And honestly, it looked like people that were like a little bit, sketchy looking. And they walked over to us and were like, "Oh no, what have we done? What's going to happen?" And they gave us this paper bag, and they said, "We live up the street, and like maybe like I don't know, 20 kilometers back, and we saw you biking by, and we like knew it was going to rain, so we drove into town, bought you a huge." Thing of fish and chips and all this stuff, which again, we ate anyway because it was polite. And we went down to our wine cellar. We got the finest Maori wine, and this is your supper. And it's because we knew that you were going to be miserable by the time you arrived here. And like
Wow.
we said, we just got out the words thank you, and they were in their truck again and gone. Like didn't want a word of it. Just that's what they did. And so it just happens so often in Australia as well. Like people always pulling us over and taking care of us. When our bikes broke down, our Warmshowers person came pick us up, called her buddy who ran the bike shop, and he spent like hours fixing our bike, which was completely wrecked. He had to drill a hole in our axle and all this stuff, and he fixed it. Like kids just they attract generosity, and although like we weren't looking for it, I think it just always kind of came to us, and so. Yeah, we took it. And so that was what saved a lot off of even our budget. Like we ended up having a lot more affordable trip as it was just because we discovered this. It's a lot less so in Europe and a lot less so when your kids are as tall as you are. So I think like that's been like Europe did cost a little bit more. Like in France, you have to camp because it's expensive to stay inside. But like in Portugal, for example, we were in the Algarve region, and it was like it's normally very expensive to go, and there's nowhere to camp. But we happened to be there in March, and there was nobody at the resort. So resorts were like I think it was like 30 euros for a night for all four of us inside in this like multi-roomed suite with fuzzy, house coats and the whole bit, and like for nothing because there was nobody else there, right? They were
Yeah.
desperate to sell the rooms, and so um but then in Europe, there's places like Albania and Croatia where like you can stay for next to like cheaper than a French campground with a huge, huge meal as well, because they're
Mhm.
countries that are starting to build their tourism industry. So yeah, there's lots of ways to figure it out. And we used to have this really good deal going with, and there's I think a lot of even podcasts about how to use credit cards to get free flights and stuff like that. And so we had kind of figured this out. Josh's uncle pointed it to us, and so we got a lot of flights for a really, really, really next to nothing in terms of flying. So we did this whole thing. We would order credit cards, and it seemed like this great thing. And then I think it was about 2, 3 months ago, Blake, that they just like called us on it and they took away all our points. So we're like,
Oh,
uh-oh.
oh, wow.
So we're like, well, too bad you can't take away Australia and New Zealand from
That's
us.
right.
But
I've never
yeah,
heard
so
of
that's
that happening.
over. No
Wow.
more bad advice
Okay.
now. Don't try the credit card thing. But like it worked for us for a while. So but like it's one of those things like you find ways.
Yeah. I love how you described earlier how children can become your porters, and now you're describing how children can essentially attract offers of free food and housing if they're
Yeah.
the appropriate age and cuteness level, of course.
Well, oh my, like hiking in France on the Camino, and most like the Camino in France, most of it is retired French folks, right? And we were new parents, so like everybody who would pass us would be like, oh, a baby, and they would just take him out of our hands, and start fawning over him, and like if we had questions about like was he toothing or what was going on, so we could ask them all these questions, and it was pretty awesome because like even in your young family like you almost always have your baby with you and stuff, but like they would just be passing them around, we'd be eating, and Heron would be all over the place. One time we ended up he wasn't eating solid food yet. We were in Spain and we were in a grocery store, and I was like, where I was shopping separately and I saw Joss and she didn't have Heron. I'm like, where's Heron? She's like, I don't know, somebody took him. And they brought him around, and so we found him, and the lady brought him back. He had this big breadstick sticking out of his mouth. We're like, what the heck? What's going on?
You,
But
you,
then other places in Spain, like we just walk, especially these little villages. Like I remember one time this like lady comes like bounding out of her house with a fresh thing of muffins. She's like, I just baked these, and I saw you from my window, and like I hear some muffins for you. Like it's crazy. People just love it, and
wow.
because it sticks out a little bit too, right? Like you're right. It's a cuteness level. It's something that's new, and but especially in Europe, especially in small villages, man, they love babies.
Yeah. And you crowdsourced your childcare too. And
Yeah, exactly.
maybe even parenting advice.
Yeah. Oh, we got tons, and the best because these are grandparents, right? Who like miss their grandkids, and so they just want to fawn over somebody. And yeah, we got a lot of really good advice because we were completely new parents. Like he was 2 months old, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, we benefited a lot from that part too.
So, Ed, tell me about the books that you've written and where they came from, where how they originated, and just a little bit about what is inside them.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Uh, they originated from mostly I can picture times in New Zealand and Australia, people saying like, "Oh man, this is awesome! Like, you should write a book." And we'd say, "Yeah, yeah, we should." Like I enjoy writing. Like it has always been something I've enjoyed. But then you get home and then you've got your schooling or you've got my other writing job. So like life just gets in the way, and so we never really were able to get it off the ground. And then finally we said, okay, once I stopped writing as a full-time job and was teaching, I thought, okay, this would be fun just for something to do on the side after the boys go to bed. So we had put some blogs together in Australia and New Zealand, and so I just kind of compiled them and added some more stuff and did some interviews with the boys, and yeah, turned it into a book. It's a long process. It takes a lot of time of And honestly, most of the time it's getting up at 6 a.m. and working till about 7 before the boys wake up. And yeah, so they're both two books now. We did one about Europe as well. We just put that out a little while ago, end of or middle 2024. And they're called Bike Touring with Kids. The first one is Bike Touring with Kids, the Oceania Odyssey. And the second one is called Bike Touring with Kids, Europe Epic. And we're working on a few. I eventually on our website, we're going to put up a few more ebooks on like some of the shorter ones, like a long ones in North America, Cuba, and stuff. Shorter ebooks so that people can get the hang of it, and with a lot more like very specific details about like where we went and how you plan a trip, and some of those logistical little like gold nuggets of gold little tips that can help people get make bike touring easier. But in the books themselves at the moment are just like our funny stories for the most part. Like we like mostly I like to I'm a storyteller, and I like, as you can tell, I like to ramble a little bit about stuff and tell some of the funny stories that we've done. And so I just get a kick out of writing these stories and telling them. In Oceania Odyssey, it's mostly about like exploding camp stoves and kids stepping in cow crap and all of those little trials and tribulations that we had. And then in Europe, it's a little bit more about the lessony stuff, like going, one chapter about how kids plan, and another one of my favorite ones is about Heron becoming a teenager and how we kind of deal with that on the road, because it's a different mentality to parent a teenager. But also in the way of trying to narrate it in a way that people can be like, okay, this chapter on Albania, that sounds good. Like, and then some of the details of what it's like, and then kind of how we did it, and that kind of thing. Because again, like people, they're like, oh man, that just sounds good, but I just don't think I can do it. But like I am the least fit person in the Yukon. Everybody's pretty fit in the Yukon, but like I am not fit. And like I can bike and that's fine, but like it's possible. It's possible for just about anybody to do. You're camping, you're just eating regular food, like you're just figuring things out as we went along. We're just normal people who figured it out. And I think that hopefully that comes through in the books, is that
Hmm.
it's like we are goofy and silly. I am far from the perfect. We are both far from the perfect parents. One of my good stories, well, I'm not really proud of it, but being in Norway, we're just about done our 10,000 kilometers in Norway, and um, Jocelyn's chain snapped because my maintenance schedule hadn't gone exactly probably according to what it should have gone. And I was like, no, I've got this problem fixed. I got it fixed. And so I was trying to fix it, but we were in a rush. We needed to get to a train like 30 minutes away. And the whole family's like, Dad, just let us go. We'll just run with it, or we'll figure something else out. I'm like, no. And I couldn't figure it out. And I had this little fit, and I just threw the piece way into the into the woods, and I like start stomping and just getting all angry. And it was like not a model at all of how you are resilient or resolve problems or anything like that. It was pretty terrible. But um uh yeah,
It's good.
we're
It's
not
good to
perfect
know you're still
parents,
human beings.
and we're
Yeah.
showing, yeah, and that, like there's a and in the Oceania book, there's an awful lot of diarrhea and like problems with poop and things like that. That like I think especially younger audiences, like younger families. One of our family friends read it out loud at night, and the kids just loved it. They're like, tell the fart story again, kind of thing. But um, yeah, so yeah, we're not great athletes, we're not perfect parents, but like you learn as you go. And I think the main kind of theme that sort of came out of this last book, the Europe book, was that all along this like epic trip along Europe, we kind of decide we learned we found that we'd kind of evolved like throughout the time we were together as a family. We used to be these two parents who had our two kids, and we would bring them along on our bike adventures. And now in Europe, like we're a team. Like we were four experienced bikers who all know how to fix our bikes and all know how to put up the tent and cook the food. Like we're now just four best friends out for a ride together. And that's
Hmm.
probably like that's the coolest thing that a parent can hope for, is to have that feeling. I'm
Yeah.
getting a bit emotional about it there, but it is the coolest feeling to have these teenage kids that you just, yeah. you feel like you're best friends. And so
Mm,
it's a pretty cool thing.
yeah, it's beautiful. If anyone wants to follow your future family adventures or non-family adventures online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. Thanks. We still blog about our summer trips at Yukon for Explore. So Yukon, the number four, and the word explore.com, because we're four people from the Yukon. So Yukon4Explorer.com, and then our Instagram, which is Jocelyn takes phenomenal pictures. I take crummy ones, so I'm not allowed, but the boys are starting to take better pictures now too. And that's and Instagram is at Yukon4Explorer. We've got a new ebook about our kayak trip we did in Baja. We did a couple of kayak trips there as well for fairly affordable. And yeah, a bunch of different things that are on there to follow our adventures and to figure it. The books are available on Amazon straight up, but you can find information about them on the blogs too.
Ed Gillis, thanks so much for coming on to Dirtbag Ridge.
I had a really good time. Thanks so much for making time.